Call to order the Thursday, January 22nd, 2015 Board of Adjustment meeting. Roll call, please.
Rhonda Johnson. Dolly.
Here.
Schreiber.
Here.
McGuire.
Here.
Lawrence.
Here.
Stonebarger.
Here.
Bill Johnson.
Here.
Dennis Arnold and Dan Albertson are absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the 2/9/2014 minutes. I need a motion and a second.
I make a motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Lawrence,
Second.
second by Mr. Stonebarger. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is applicant Christy Ching, owner of property owner Travis Mogg, seeks conditional use to operate balloons, banners, et cetera from her home in the R2A zone at 524 5th Street Southeast.
The applicant seeks conditional use approval to operate a balloons, banners, etc. business from her leased home located in the R2A single-family attached residential district. On September 15, 2014, property owner Travis Mogg and tenant Christy Ching were notified to seek lawful approval in order to continue operating a business at 524 5th Street Southeast, where she resides in the R2A zone single-family dwelling. Home occupations may be allowed in the R2A single-family residential district per city zoning ordinance sections 21-1804, 21-1603, and 21-1403, subject to conditions. The applicant tenant proposes to utilize part of the basement, less than 25% of the home's 2,258 square foot living area for business use. She has received and will comply with the ordinance requirements for home occupations per definitions and per chapter 2170 and section 210202 2B6A through H. The property is also subject to compliance with chapter 2163 off-street parking and loading requirements, chapter 2173 landscape and lighting standards, and any other conditions the BOA, the Board of Adjustment, deems necessary. According to the applicant's submitted site plan, the property has a 26-foot driveway from the street to the attached single-car garage. The minimum number of legal-sized and paved off-street parking spaces required for just the single-family dwelling, the primary use, is 2. A total of 1 legal outside off-street parking space currently exists on the property. There is sufficient area to add off-street parking spaces over here to the east of the driveway. It is this board's responsibility to consider requiring additional compliant off-street parking spaces as a condition of secondary use approval. As far as landscape and lighting standards, Highway 81 has reduced the west boulevard, leaving only front yard space for tree plantings to the west of the house. 2 boulevard trees currently exist on the south boulevard. There is no sidewalk trail on the south boulevard, and sidewalk exists on the west. This board must determine if the plan shows satisfactory provision and arrangement concerning the ordinance sections identified. If endorsed, the conditions such as more off-street parking spaces and/or fulfillment of the boulevard infrastructure requirements may be considered. I have one note from an adjacent landowner, Mrs. Amundsen. She supports this request.
And she lives directly to the east of her.
Thank you.
Yep. She lives at 511.
Under 217002, this is an acceptable use, acceptable home occupation in our standards.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll open the public hearing if anyone's here to speak on behalf or against the conditional use. Is the applicant here?
She is here.
Why don't you come on up, state your name. We got a couple questions for you.
My name is Christy Chang.
Thank you. You leased the home
Yes.
from someone, and what type of traffic do you expect when you do your banners? Do you deliver them or do they come pick them up generally?
I do deliver some, but also some people stop and pick them up, which they're usually there for maybe 2 minutes at the most. It's pick up and go.
I would assume you wouldn't have multiple customers there at the same
No.
time. It would just be a coincidence if they happen to
Right.
swing at the same time.
It's usually one person at a time.
Jill, on the parking, it's on a corner, so there is some off-street on one side. The other side's on Highway 81, correct?
Yes, I believe this area isn't no parking, is it?
No, it's not parking.
If we reviewed the signage requirements with her as to what we allow,
Yes.
the square footage, what is that offhand?
It is a small sign that must be attached to the house, not more than 400 square inches in area.
And you understand that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for her?
Is the sign that's leaning up against the house, is that the sign you're gonna use?
I have to get a new sign.
You have to get a new sign,
Yeah.
okay.
All right, if no one else has any questions, I'll close the public hearing, ask for a motion and a second for discussion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
McGuire one, motion by Mr. McGuire, second by Mr. Dolly. Any further discussion on it? With that, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Any other items, Joe?
No, that'll be all.
Need a motion and a second to adjourn? Maybe not? Yeah, I did that at the
He did.
beginning.
Yep. he did.
Need a motion and a second to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mrs. Johnson, second by Mr. Stonebarger. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, Jeff, you ready?
Yep.
With that, I'll call to order the Thursday, January 22nd, 2015 Watertown City Plan Commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Albertson is absent. Rhonda Johnson? Dolly?
Here.
Shriver?
Here.
McGuire? Here. Lawrence? Here. Arnold is absent. Stonebarger?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I need a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Lawrence,
Second.
second by Mr. Stonebarger. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Second item on the agenda is the Willow Creek Village rezone. We'll have a public hearing. Go ahead, never mind, just go ahead.
Can we get approval of the minutes? I had a modified
Okay,
agenda page.
all right, I must have grabbed the wrong one. Second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. What were the
The minutes from November 20th, 2014.
November 20th, 2014?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Dolly,
Second.
second by Mrs. Johnson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Third item on the agenda is the Willow Creek Village rezone.
Okay. We received a petition requesting to rezone 4 lots in the Willow Creek Village Edition. This addition went through the preliminary plan process back in 2013 with the property adjacent to Willow Creek Drive was zoned C3 and the rest of the property was zoned R3. And the petitioner is requesting that this area highlighted in black be rezoned to R1 single-family residential units. If this plan, or if this request gets approved, the petitioner would like to replat, making these 4 lots into 7 lots. His plan to replat would, all the lots would still be conforming R1 lots. And the reason they want this rezone is because they feel that adjacent to this pond that's going to be here will be a very desirable place to have single-family homes. All the adjacent zoning will be R3, except for to the north will be C3, highway commercial. And all these lots will meet the minimum R1 requirements. With that, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. With that, I'll open the public hearing if anyone's here to speak on behalf or against the zoning. The one thing, Jeff, I'd like to make fair warning to him. To me, I don't have any problem going R1. It's kind of, I have a bigger problem going from R3 from R1 in an area that's already zoned. But will you warn him that if we do this as R1, if he comes back in after one of those R1 lots are sold and says he wants to go back to R3, we historically have, we generally don't do that. It's one of those things that a landowner goes out there and buys a lot, And once that last lot isn't selling, all of a sudden they want to go back to a more dense zone. We generally don't do that once those lots. So once he switches those to R1 and one of those lots are sold, his chances of getting them to go back to R3 or R2 are not nearly as good. So,
Yeah, I can definitely give him that.
but yeah, I see there's a big pond there that they've done, and I mean, if he wants to put R1 there, it should be fine. Since
So
no
if
one's, go ahead.
If we zone this R1, are we gonna run into the same problem we have on North 81 where there's a highway commercial and the residential people there, R1 people don't like the businesses that are there? Or are we gonna get into a contest about what businesses we should have or shouldn't have?
We shouldn't. There's really not that much. There's just that little spot right there where one lot touches up against the C3. Everybody else is quite a ways back. I'd be more concerned of R1 lots. And what's his intention in the R3? I mean, he can put R2 twin homes in there in an R3 if he chose to also.
Yeah, I don't know for sure what his plan is for each individual lot, but some of these lots are big enough in size that, you know, they could fit an 8-plex or a 12-plex because they are, 1,500 square feet in size. So they're big enough that they could hold.
And they're big lots.
Mhm. So,
Any other questions for Jeff? With that, I'll close the public hearing, ask for a motion and a second on the rezone.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Dolly, second by Mr. McGuire. Any other discussion on it? Anybody have any issues? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, the revised fence ordinance. We're just going to discuss it today?
Yep, today
We're not going
is,
to take any action?
nope, today is just
Come
a-
on.
just a discussion. Let you guys think about it for a while first. Just a second. Staff was asked to look into the current fence ordinance and revise it so in a way that it would be more clear and easier to understand. Right in front of you, I have the current ordinance governing fences. It's very brief. And in your packets, I sent what staff proposed, which goes more in depth, more in detail, and helps clearly state when and where fences are allowed and what conditions there may be. If you want, I could read through both of these or whatever you'd like me to do.
I think just highlight, the old one, we basically didn't have much of a fence ordinance. And what our concern has been over the last 5 years, this has come up before us before, where we've always said we should tackle that fence ordinance because our current ordinance will allow you to put a 7-foot fence up in your front yard. We don't regulate as to how much opaqueness is to whether or not you can see through it or not. And there's a few areas where we see someone goes rogue and puts a fence up in their front yard. But where we see it the most is in our collector and arterial streets where people will buy 2 lots or they'll buy a front to back lot and they see the lot as their backyard, but it's really a front yard and it's adjacent to someone else. So what we had always talked about is we just need some regulations as to how high the fence can be, and if it's in your front yard, how far it has to be off your lot line, and that could make a difference based on if you're on an arterial street, a neighborhood street, or a collector. So I would say kind of go over the new ordinance and just say whether that's addressed at all in our current ordinance.
Yeah, you nailed it right on the head. Our current ordinance doesn't state anything about location of fence other than it has to be 1 foot off of the sidewalk. That's what number 2 states. But on our proposed, we did limit, certain yards, the front yard limited to 4 feet in height. And it had to be no more than 30% opaque, so that way people could see over it or through it. And we had to keep it out of the clear view triangle, so that way it wouldn't impede anyone's turning. And we tried to just make the rules clear for what was allowed in both, the side yards or how to handle situations where it's corner lot or.
1 second on letter A there where you said it needs to be 30% opaque. So that's a fence we can see through, wrought iron fences, things like that, including the clear view triangle. So if I'm going to put a fence up in my front yard, I can go all the way to my corner as long as it's at least 30% opaque.
Right. This proposed fence would meet the Clearview triangle requirements.
That one can go in, as long as it's 30% opaque, it can be in that clear view, and 4 feet, it can be in the clear view triangle. So as you come up on a corner, you can see through it.
Yep, and then we also stated in here that when you're adjacent to an alley, you have to be 4 feet off the property line. That just also gives a little bit more.
Hold on 1 second, let's go back over B, side yards and rear yards. In a side yard and rear yard, it can be up to the lot line unless you're up against an alley.
Yes.
Clear? And right now, we allow people to put fences right on the lot line. Up to the lot line. There's one of the questions people have is, well, why do we let them be right on the lot line?
We never let them be on it.
Within an inch of it. Some will say, how do you service the backside of your fence when it's not, you can't get to it from your property? We have an answer for that, don't we?
You better be good with your neighbors if it's a serviceable fence, or you put up vinyl, or you put up chain links. You don't have to go over there.
Turn your mic on, Ken. He can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said you either got to be good with your neighbors, or you got to put up a chain link or plastic fence, something you don't have to service on the other side.
I know we've talked about it in passing where we thought, well, we should be 2 or 3 feet off the lot line, and it just never made sense
Yeah, how
when
would
we
you-
actually
how would you
worked
mow
through it. Yeah, as we worked through it, we always felt that it's worked pretty well on or up to, near the lot line, not dead on it.
I haven't, maybe more than once in the last 10 years, had a problem with somebody not being able to service the other side of the fence as it currently reads. So I don't think that's a big issue. I think you'd have a bigger issue leaving a 2 or 3 foot patch of grass. So now they
Especially
gotta go around and
if
do it, or
fences
they
were
don't go
butted
do
up
it.
against each other. Normally
Yeah.
people don't butt them up against each other. You'd have tunnels down between fences. And I know we've kind of hashed it through, and we've gone full circle and always come back and said the way we do it is probably the better of the ways. Okay, double frontage, this
So
is,
my question then to you is, the double frontage, like you said, you're off 25 feet. Like the ones on 19th, so they're gonna have to go outside the fence to service their backyard.
no, on the double frontage, depends on what street they're up against.
Okay.
If you're up against a normal neighborhood street, you gotta be 20.
Then you're gonna fall back down to your 4 foot fence for
Yeah,
the
you
25
either
feet?
gotta drop your fence down, shorter fence that's opaque, or you gotta back it off the lot line. Most of the ones that we see that are double frontage are up against arterial or collector streets, like 19th Street. And I was gonna say, as we go forward, give us an example of an arterial street. That's the heavier,
Yep,
that's a more dense street than a
That's our
collector.
heaviest streets. Highway 212, Highway 81, and Highway 20 are all arterial streets. And then the next highest would be the collector streets, and that's our 19th and our 14th Avenue and 4th Avenue and streets like that they still go from one end of town to the other and get a lot of traffic.
And they're identified in the comprehensive
they are.
comprehensive land use plan.
Then in that case, if you pull the fence 10 feet off the property line, then you can go back to the 7 foot full fence.
Okay, so say your neighbors all have fences on there. You're gonna have to put in a gate to access to that last 10 feet? Or how do you get back there to mow that 10 feet?
I would
around
suggest
the
you
block.
either put a ladder over or put in a gate.
Okay, I'm just putting this together in my head, so.
What it's designed most for is that we don't want to box somebody in. You get 3 lots that are front to backs, and then you got a guy who buys a lot that's coming onto that collector street. Now he's got fences completely up to the front yard lot line. And most of this, we looked at a few different fencing ordinances, primarily Sioux Falls. And that's kind of what we modeled it off of.
I can pull up a map of anywhere in town if there's any particular lots that you want to see, or just to see that, difference between a corner lot and a double frontage lot.
Go up north, go up near that corner of 14th Avenue and 19th Street. You kind of got, as you go south on there, you've got some people, double lots that are front to back. But as you go north on there, they're not really double lots. They're single lots, but they're just long and slender.
Yeah, lots like this one. these
Both
ones.
sides of that road have fences.
Yeah, the 19th and I think it's 20th. Oh,
This one has a fence all the way around it.
And if you look at the house in the lower part of the screen, that's an example of a house that's boxed in by a fence on both sides. It's not the most aesthetic thing as you're driving down those roads, and those people won't be required to move those fences at any time, but if they're damaged due to a catastrophic event or weather, they'd be required to conform. Go further north
Yep.
on there. This is where we see a lot of that, north of the water tower. Those
Scroll right
lots
in there.
those lots front the street there, and they all have deep backyards. In a case like that, that's a collector street, so they'd be required to, that fence would have to be 10 feet off the lot line if it's 7 feet tall, or
Yep.
it would have to be lower and opaque. They'd be 7 feet off the lot. It just gives you more room. Once you put a sidewalk and everything in there, and I do believe that area is, were they gonna put sidewalks that far north?
Yeah, they're
So, and that area has some elevation issues and some swales, so, it's probably a good time for the fence ordinance to come in, is that street gets torn up and sidewalks get put on both sides of that street. You'd be walking right up against a fence in some of those areas, and you picture what it would look like with a little better spacing.
With that being said, Pat, then with sidewalks there, if they want to put a fence, are they going to be able to put that sidewalk, they're 4 foot, even if they want to put a 4 foot just for children, protection, is that going to be able to go right up to that city sidewalk, or is there a setback for that?
It'd be their property line.
Right, it's gonna be based on where the property line is, not where the sidewalk. But if the sidewalk was adjacent to the property line, then they just have to keep the fence on their property with the 4 footer. And then if they
That
have
area up
privacy,
there,
then
we've
they
got
gotta
quite a
go.
bit of right-of-way up there. I always, as I drive up there, you look for the fire hydrants, utility poles, power boxes. Those are all in the public right-of-way. You can kind of get an idea where the lot lines actually are.
But this is just what's proposed. That's why we want to look at it, think about it, and say, hey, that's good, that's bad, that's indifferent. What other suggestions you might have?
The whole idea is just the neighborhood. Everybody buys lots, and they kind of develop them a little differently. You just want it to be uniform in the neighborhood and a nice area. Some people, fences are good neighbors. Some people, but it's not, aesthetically, it doesn't always look right.
so let's zoom in over here a little bit and let's look at something that's not on a collector or arterial, I'm guessing. No, the other way. Go the other way. Okay, so say the guy on the corner, right about where your cursor is. He wants to put scroll down a little
Yeah,
bit. So he wants to put in a fence in his backyard. He has to stay off. I just want to wrap my head around it a little bit. Let's say the guy on the right there. He wants to put your other right. He wants to put in a fence right there. He has to stay off. Let's say he wants a 7-foot fence on that corner lot. Where would he have to stay 10 feet off of both of them? Okay.
10-foot offset fence in that yard. You gotta stay with the 4 footer there for the full 25 feet. But
Okay.
over here, because it's the second front, if he wants over there, then he can come back 10 feet and he can put up a 7-foot solid fence.
Okay.
Otherwise, if he wanted to put a fence to the lot line on that side, it would have to be 4 feet high, 30% opaque. His backyard could be completely 7 feet and fenced in.
Right, then once he got to the 25-foot setback, then he could go full 7-foot fence.
As our ordinance reads right now, he could put a 7-foot solid wood fence all the way around the entire property.
Except for he'd have to be a foot off of this property line, a foot off of this property line, and then these two, all he has to be is up to them.
He could
And
make
not on 'em.
they could put a fortress there if he wanted to.
Yep, pretty much.
See, in my opinion, a chain link fence, which would be 30% opaque, correct? in that backyard would look great, but a slotted 4-foot fence that you can't see through, can't see the dog, can't see all that stuff would look just as good to me, I guess. You know what I mean?
And he could put either one
Oh, slotted.
in the backyard.
In back.
He can put whatever he wants
Not on
back there.
that would be considered as double front, correct? So if I'm driving down that road, he can't have a slotted.
What do you mean by slotted?
Well, let's take a chain link and put the little lap.
Oh, correct. Yeah, it has to be 30% opaque. That's what's standard and everywhere you've, what other areas did we look? We looked at Sioux Falls fencing ordinance, who else?
We put in 25 feet.
Luke?
Thank you. Luke Muller, First District. You'd asked about standard around and some of the questions. Primary reason that we've got the difference in the front yard, and I think that you guys are seeing it as you go through, but the main thing that you're worried about is for one, safety of people walking on the sidewalks. Two, safety of vehicles backing out of their driveway, vehicles coming and passing by those places. And three, probably equally as important is, definitely from the 7-foot fence standpoint, the 4-foot may be a little bit different, but, to make sure that you've got fence that isn't the fortress like we have now, emergency responders like to know what's on the other side of that fence. And so if you've got that ability to see over the fence from where you're at, that helps. Now the question you've got about, the slats on the side along the, on the corner lot, in some cases it makes sense. It'd probably be okay if it would make some sense to argue that you could have a solid walled fence along, say, the north side of this particular lot. But if we move the access closer to that road, which is the case in some places, then it makes it very difficult to be able to see as you're backing out into that street and vehicles to see you coming and vice versa. So that's why you see a lot of communities, and honestly, I see a lot of communities go to 30 inches, 2.5, anywhere from 2.5 to 3 feet. 4 feet is kind of high, but also a lot of those will allow solid up to that point and then opaque above that. So that's.
Yeah, that's just the thought that I have is the shorter it is, the lesser opaque you need it, I believe. I mean, in that backyard, if he wants to have a 4-foot or even like 36, inch fence, I don't think 30% opaque, you can still see over it. But if you want to keep maybe the dog or some of the toys and all that stuff back there and kind of cover a little bit of it. But it's hard to make that distinction on just looking at this one lot. So that's just my thoughts.
At this point, we're just in the discussion phase. I'd like in the next meeting to actually take action on it, but it'd give us some time to look around once you kind of see it and get your arms around it. As you drive around town, look at some of the different places. Look at some of the existing fences and then say what they would look like if they were differently. That's on the commercial and industrial municipal, any changes in those fences at all?
The commercial, we kept that at 8 feet in height, which was what it was before, and we still allow barbed wire, which was currently allowed, but we added in that the 25-foot clear view triangle had to be kept clear, so that way, there wouldn't block anyone in at the street intersections. And,
The other thing was with the commercial, they're still allowed to go with a full 7 or 8 foot fence all the way out to the front property line too. They're not restricted in the front yard like the other ones would be, because most of the time on a commercial industrial, it is a security reason that they're doing it anyway, so.
I have a question for the utilities. Did I see him back there hiding behind the? Tell us a little bit about the boxes, the power boxes. We see guys fence them. We see them. You guys, a landowner is not allowed to do certain things. You have to be able to get so close to that with your stick, right? And there's probably a lot of examples. How do you enforce it, or is it enforced? Do you find times where You gotta, is it 8 feet that, you can't put something within 8 feet of it? Because you gotta be able to get a stick in there to turn off power, right?
Yeah, Mark Meyer, Watertown Utilities, it's 6-foot stick is what you need for pulling the boots off the transformers and stuff on the inside. Do we really enforce it? No. We don't really have that much issue with it, really. I mean, one of the biggest problems is if they put the box right up, or the fence right up next to the box, can't get the box open. That's one issue, but
Your boxes are generally in the public right of way.
yeah.
So if we move these fences, in many of these cases, the collector and arterial areas, if we move those fences back a little bit, that pretty much takes the issue out of your problem of somebody putting a fence or boxing in one of your boxes.
Right. I would say our biggest issue would be in people's backyards, you know, where the fences are right up or going around our boxes. But
Mark, to follow up on Pat's question, like around your substations and your water towers, if you look at municipal uses right now as proposed in the draft, it doesn't indicate what the maximum height could be around those kind of facilities. Do you have a desired height that you'd like to be able to get up to? Is it in there, Ken, and I missed it?
It is, it allows up to 10 feet for municipal.
I believe ours are 8 foot.
Okay.
And like you said, that's more of a security issue than anything, is so people can't get in there. And most of yours, you'd probably do not have any that are solid, do you?
No.
Yours are all
Chain link.
chain link.
Yeah. And Sarah and I were just talking in the back earlier about what I thought of fences and easements. Yeah. The problem is how do you put a fence 10 foot off somebody's lot line in the rear? I mean, you could, like you said, you could have a tunnel going down there. So,
Yeah, if everybody puts it 10 foot off the lot line, you have a clarified
Right.
tunnel.
yeah.
And that's 10 foot off. That's considered it. That's not in your rear yard. In your rear yard, you could be right up on it. If it's your rear yard, it's a front yard used as a rear yard.
Yeah.
So I mean, it would be they might consider it their backyard, but it's someone else's front yard,
Right.
the neighbor's front yard.
Just a typical easement's 10 foot each side of the lot line. So most people are putting their fences in a utility easement.
You're right, because there is a utility easement back there. That's why you run into the issue with your boxes.
Right.
Is they're allowed to put the fence in the easement because it's on their property, but there's an easement on that property.
Yeah.
And Ken, that's standard, that we will allow them to put a fence in the easement.
We will, but we did add into this one where they can't put a permanent type structure fence. And like the guy that put the concrete wall fence up, that is no longer allowed in a utility easement. But if they want to put up a picket or wood or something like that, but they always are told every time, so if utility goes through there and tears out your fence, that's not their problem to put it back, it's yours. But we won't allow them to put anything like a solid type structure and pour a bunch of concrete anymore. That will not be allowed in the easement.
Should that be in this fencing ordinance? Should we make a note on there that if you, okay, it is.
How many areas that in town do you have easements in the backyards?
Almost everywhere.
Almost everywhere. And so everywhere there's a fence.
If there's
You
not an
guys,
alley,
you
there's
got
an
somebody
easement.
that's gonna have to climb over it or through it someday.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of the biggest issues is for the locators, because they go to locate utilities and they have to get into the neighbors' yards to hook up to the gas or the electric, and most fences are locked. So, you know, they're not supposed to climb over, but sometimes they don't have no other choice.
Interesting, you don't think of the utilities when they're in those backyards.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Any other questions for Mark while he's up there?
That was number 2 on the first page at the
No,
top.
I was just saying like a wood fence, you know, that if the utilities need to get in there, if you put in a fence in the easement, they have the ability to take it out at no cost. I just
Skid
didn't know-
steer, their end loader, whatever, and just tear it out of there. That's,
Okay, I just didn't know where that's stated in an ordinance or in a bylaw or in.
Is
the
it spelled
easement
out in the
or-
easement, Mark?
Definition of easement.
It's in the definition of
It's
easement,
it's
okay.
an easement. It's a public right of way.
Okay.
Now, the easements that I get from people that aren't platted easements, we do state in ours that we will reconstruct to, you know, the best standards or to equal. I mean, I don't think we'd really tear something out and then just leave it for them, but I suppose it is possible.
Sarah's walking up. She has something.
Sarah Karen, Acting City Engineer. I just want to say, regardless of what the ordinance says, when we have a project and put a sewer or storm pipe in an easement and there's a fence there, taxpayers are paying to have that fence removed, repaired, and reset. We've never torn a fence out and said, okay, guy, you shouldn't have put that there. Your problem. I mean, maybe we could legally do that, but we don't. We're spending tax dollars to put those fences, take them out gently, set them somewhere safe, fix them when they get dinged up, and they do, and put them back. So I don't like fences and easements. Fences don't belong in drainage easements at all. Absolutely not. They go in, but they block drainage. In utility easements, we get requests and more to put in sump drains in newer neighborhoods that are put in with high groundwater, and they like them in the backyard. It's just impossible to fish something like that through fences. So I know it's swimming upstream, but I don't like them. I don't like fences.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think you do have a drainage easement, and a fence is the last thing you want in there because it inhibits the
Right.
drainage of the purpose of the.
Right, and we're looking, to
Interesting.
plat those easements. We've calculated a major event of water flowing unencumbered safely so it doesn't flood someone's basement. But that's only theoretical. People put sheds, and we can't be everywhere and, tell them, hey, there's an invisible drainage easement there. Good
It'd be
idea.
nice if the grass was blue in those drainage easements and all the easements, so you could see where they're at when you're driving around. Well, thank you. What we'll want to do is, I would say between now and the next meeting, just kind of look around. The main part of it is if it's in a front yard setback, it's a 4-foot fence, 30% opaque. If it's in a front yard setback that's in an arterial or a collector street, we'll allow them to go 7 feet high, but they have to sit at 10 feet back. I'd say take a look at some of them and get an idea so we can decide, vote on it next time and pass it on to the city council.
I did have one question here. The current ordinance classifies hedges in there, when considering the front yard for visibility, but the new one doesn't appear to address hedges. Is that going to be separate?
We left hedges in the landscaping requirement because you
Okay.
don't have to come and get a permit to put up a hedge. You have to get a permit to put up a fence or a wall over 4 feet, or if it's as a thing. And that's why hedges is basically pulled out of all this ordinance.
Thank you. Anything else, Jeff, on that one? Item number 5 in old business. Luke, were you going to visit with us on comprehensive land use plan?
But I think that you might want to listen to Sarah first.
All right.
I have a shorter thing to add in old business. I would like to let you know that at the last city council meeting, actually, I think it was in a work session, that one of the councilmen asked that the Plan Commission and staff revisit the R1L zoning district, which was proposed years ago and considered briefly, and I don't know the history. It can be brought back up. It's, the R1L would be a special residential district at the lake to allow for different zoning requirements at the lake than we have in town proper. And I think it was pretty controversial at the time. The lake is huge, and theoretically, we'd rezone everyone at the lake, so that's a pretty major undertaking to notify everyone and to get public input on what the standards would be in an R1L zone. But it has been requested that you maybe take that up.
What brought this on?
I think it's possible the Stony Point development, where the developer is wanting to do things special because it's the lake. And right now, we don't have any different standards for the lake. The lake is treated as the rest of the city limits. There's one standard for city limits.
So this would be anything within, would there be proximity, or, did they give us
Well,
any direction
We'd
as
have to
far as that?
define that. And First District did a study, 2001 or so. Was anybody here then?
2006.
Yeah.
I was in high school.
So, there has been a lot of thought put into it. I don't know why it was dropped from consideration, but we can pick that up, review what actions have been taken and what work has been done, and move forward with.
I would say we could do it. Some of the, just off the top of your head, some of the areas I would say of conflict that are differ between the lake and town. Fireworks. You can shoot fireworks at the lake. You can't shoot fireworks in town. What else? Habitually people will say, well, you can't store in your front yard. Well, but at the lake side is the front yard. The road side's the backyard. So there's docks and lifts in the front yard. Normally in the winter, but
That's
nobody is in their own front yard. It'd be nice is when we do it to come out with some of the major conflicts we have, and it would be an enforcement conflict. The things that the ordinance that we have that are tough to enforce because we're painting the lake area with the same brush that we paint the in-town area. What can you think of any off the top of your head? Fireworks is always a big one.
Yeah, the fireworks.
Campfires.
Right, campfires.
I think there's a difference in roads.
Driving a boat in town.
In
Can't
what?
do that.
Roads.
Well, not really. I mean, the roads that were there when we annexed are the county roads, put in
Yep.
without ditches or anything. Just a
I think that right of way is
dirt road that got
quite a
paved.
bit bigger on most of
But
it,
the
isn't it?
newer subdivisions went in with city standards, starting in 1980. And you can look back in the history of
And that would be
it.
the Summerwood area out there.
Summerwood, Paradise, Golf Course Estates. Yeah.
In our comprehensive land use plan, there is some area where in the past we thought there wouldn't be areas of development out there, but we've identified some areas in that land use plan where there could be more developments in there. And Stony Point being one where you look and go, it's not 6 lake lots, it's, 10 lake lots and 30 residential lots. And where do you go from city standards to rural standards? You see that a lot, but it'd be interesting to come up with some ideas of where they differ.
Right, is an 80-foot lot at the lake rural, where an 80-foot lot in town is urban?
Well, you get a 50-foot lot at the lake that's 50 by 350 on the west side versus in town, your 50s are only 80 deep, so you look and go, is it a compliant lot at the lake if it's total square footage versus width?
I mean, if you got a 350-foot deep lot, you obviously don't have to think about putting off-street parking or on-street parking. No one's going to park 350 or 250
Depends on
feet.
the slope.
Yeah.
If you have a steep lot that drops down to the lake, you may not have a very long driveway. That 350 feet might be all on the lake side of your home and no off-street parking, because you're actually going to ask for a variance to get closer to the road than normal so that your house isn't perched out there on a cliff. So you have to look at individual situations. If it's flat, that's true. A lot of the lake that's flat, there's ample room for long driveways, and people park along the side of the driveway. Nobody parks on the street unless there's a large gathering.
I mean, you look at, like, say, the Hidden Valley. I mean, those lots are some of the steepest on the lake, and towards the top part of
Right.
it. And there's still ample parking on most of those lots. I mean,
Right, but the road isn't the high spot. The road, those
road's the
properties
lower
go
part.
up.
Yep.
The house is on the top, and then they go down. If you're laying it out in a different way, you need to consider that, because not everything's gonna be the same. Where you have a flat area, yeah, no problem. But if you've got a road and a downslope to the water, that house is gonna be close to the road, and they're gonna ask for a variance to put it even closer to the road. It's not even gonna be room to park on their driveway in some cases, much less have 3 or 4 extra cars on their property instead of on the road. So you need to look at each individual situation.
That's tough.
I get Luke Muller with First District again. The if I remember correctly, it was a 2006 that the non-conforming lot study was finished, and that's what involved the R2A zoning district, which we adopted as a community, had an R1A district, which was not adopted by the community, but involved portions north that was some smaller width lots, about 80-foot wide lots. You had the R1L district, which was proposed through that, which was because of the 50-foot wide lots, the front yard, backyard issue, some of the variances that were being issued at the time, if I remember right, and then a few different commercial types of districts. I think that, and I don't want to steer things anymore. I'm not all that sure what had prompted it, but I think maybe what might make sense is that it's my expectation we're going to be talking land use plan next Wednesday as well, over at our first district meeting. Perhaps after spending an hour discussing a land use plan, if members of the board want to stick around, we could dust off what that district said before, and at the very least, familiarize yourself with what was proposed 10 years ago, and go from there.
Sounds good. Any other old business?
I've got, this comes back to the land use plan discussion, and I'll leave this up to the board as far as how long you'd like to run. We had planned on meeting on Wednesday and had a meeting come up here in town at that time. I'm hoping that I can have a half an hour of your time. Are you willing to allow that?
I watch Pawn Stars. How about 15 minutes? Yeah. We'll settle at 20.
About 350.
Oh, you meant now?
Get comfortable. Pull that up. All right, so as those are being handed out, remember we've met on and off here over the course of the last 6 months, trying to work on some policies or at least some areas, important points of the land use plan, getting more into the nuts and bolts of specific areas to develop, we expect to develop within the community. Starting on the fringe portions of the community, that's why that discussion, the R1L, is very close to where we're at. If we had only a handful of planning commission members at attendance the last meeting we had, in which we discussed most of the area north and west of Highway 212 and 81 that's outside of city limits. This time I've got a set of sheets together here, 20 sections or 21 sections, section township range that are south and west of 212 and 81. And what I've got here is just the layout, where we're at today, what's going on the ground today in these areas, where and how do we expect these to go in the future. At the very top of each page, you'll see we identify what section it is and what township it's in. And the very first one is Section 2 of Compesca Township. And then you'll see at the top, I've got a color-coded key that shows rural uses for the future land use are identified in 2 colors. Residential use for future uses is yellow, blue is commercial, red is industrial. A lighter blue is a commercial industrial mix, orange is residential commercial mix. We don't identify a specific public use, and then some of the rural residential is identified as rural. And then in the existing land use, you can see the key that I've got on there as well. The numbers that are there are expressed in whole numbers for acres, rounded all of them, mostly to save space as much as anything. But what I want to do is I want to go through, here's what's on the ground, here's what the land use plan said the last time with a few modifications. If you see something that jumps out at you as we go through some of these sections, please shout, and we'll go through. But the first one, just working our way from west to east, Section 2 in Compesca Township, this would only have a small portion of this portion would be in the planning area, 91 acres, not anticipated to have any development. Right now, all we've got is a few houses in the country that are on lots of less than 35 acres. You'll see that I've got a category there for existing land use on, can I see that? Existing land use. You can see up here, and describe anything, any home that's on a lot of less than 35 acres outside of city limits is classified as this residential in the county, because as a lot of you are aware, the county requires a minimum 35 acre lot requirement. So if it's on a lot of less than that, we're considering that a residential setting as opposed to the rural setting in the county.
What's the change as far as future land use and where's that at now? Is rural, they're both rural? You just use a different shade, or?
In the existing land use, we're doing that just as a purple for the rural residential, and then basically combine them in the rural portion on.
Future.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, just.
To combine those two together. And so, again, that area is so far out of town, there's no utilities there, we don't expect anything to develop that way. We start heading east on 212, heading closer towards the lake, and we have, can you zoom that so that shows the whole page? We start heading east on 212, same story, nothing really expected to change from where it's at, largely from a standpoint of utilities. There are some residential, rural residences that are out there that had developed. The county's got pretty well clamped down on the zoning district that sits there. There's not anything proposed to change. And I think that is also over the shallow aquifer in that area, so we wouldn't want anything to develop unless there's utilities in that area.
What's the hole for in the middle? I mean, why is that one residence not in the rural?
Because they own more than 35 acres with that house, that's all. Is this the one you mean, right here?
Yeah,
That'd be, actually,
the one next to it. They
this
own
one here,
40.
this one actually, there's no house there yet, is the deal. It's not used residentially yet. I was mistaken. This particular one is not used residentially
Okay.
yet, is all that is. There's just no house there yet. Again, this is what's on the ground there today. In the future, it's remain rural in character the way that it sits today.
There's a house there. That's Howard Booze's house.
Is that one?
Yep.
And that must be one that he owns more than 35 acres. I'd have to go back and pull the parcels on it, but I believe that's what the case is, that he owns more than 35 acres. Again, you see 117 acres used for residences out there, 177 to remain rural without much development. You can see there's not going to be a lot of change, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time hashing over. You can see there's not a lot of residential use. There's a few houses out here, but again, they all have 35 acres to them in Section 6. You can see in the land use plan, the idea is to go the 80 line and then over to the half line into there, just in terms of what to review within that area for future development. In Section 6 of Pelican Township, keep going here. Section 5, again, there's nothing, and this, again, carry forward from the previous land use plan, there's nothing proposed or expected for future development in Section 5. There is some commercially zoned property in the county in this particular section. You can see there's a couple of pieces used commercially now. There are, I believe, Lake Mary Elevator Company. They do some auger construction out there. There's also some storage in those red spots there in the existing land use, and then also the Rooster Bar is out there. Tried hard not to mention the bar first before I went to the industrial uses. Then there's a couple of residences out there as well. You can see a little bit more land dedicated to resident or commercial use, but for the most part, remain the way it is because there's no utilities out there.
Say, Luke?
Yeah.
The section just south of there, is that where they're putting in that large 2-acre lot?
Yes, it is. Yep, we'll be there in a minute. The Section 4, I'm working west to east and then back down. Section 4, we're still heading east here, largely unchanged from the way that it sits today. That's what the land use plan suggests. You can see that there's a little suggestion there for future residential land use down on the southern portion, and that is probably more at a rural capacity because it's, as of now, it's zoned, it's already largely used residentially in that area. You can see this corresponds with this corner down here. There's just one more lot that would fill the way that the existing density is. It wouldn't develop beyond that density until it becomes annexed into the city at that point. Moving farther to the east. Now we start to get into closer to town here. And I want to make the point, particularly for anybody who's not following, who hasn't been to or through this process so far with us. The plan's been largely to go through the fringe areas first and kind of double back and go through within town to take a closer look at what's going on in town. So you can see we've always, I guess I've always referred to the green on our future land use map as kind of the big green blob in which things are happening and have always been happening. We're going to dive into that more within this plan, but I want to make sure that we've tackled everything outside first before we dive into that. That'll include that R1L discussion. But at this point, you can see future land use has identified the this stretch here as commercial for the future, and that actually shows as that commercial industrial mix is what that shows. That is, it's identified that way because that's land that was initially zoned commercial in the county when the county first adopted zoning, and it's been that way. It's not something that's going to be able to change, so we're going to have to work together to be able to work with what types of uses can go in there moving forward into the future, as has been the case. This hasn't changed for the last 15, 20, since the 1991 land use plan, if I remember right. We've got some existing rural businesses out here, Trugang, Kemlon. This right now is vacant, but there's a business looking to go into there. And then Kine and Clark Electric. We have some existing manufactured homes in this area. This is Bourne's Edition. It's a combination of homes. Looking for expansion of that area. And then this is CAC's Edition, which at this point is only starting to develop. That would be an area we would anticipate will expand over the planning period, which would be 20 years. We would expect that to expand quite a bit. So that's why you see in this particular section, expect about 200 acres. We have 200 acres identified as future residential land use. That's going to be a large area that's going to develop, and that actually has infrastructure in it or planned to go into it. So that's prepared and ready for it. Beyond that, you can see what's going on the land there now. Right now, I guess the main point that I want to make, and I wanted to emphasize that point about the utilities, is that that's been planned, master planned. We've kind of got a handle on roads and drainage and utilities through the area that's proposed to be developed in that area, with the exception of the second tier of development maybe at some point in the future and out here. But those are the types of questions we need to ask ourselves as well as we start to see some of these areas that we know we want to see develop in the future in this time frame. Is what type of impact is that going to have on our road systems that we've got? Do we need more right-of-way? Do we need to expect to have a 4-lane as opposed to a 2-lane here in certain places? Move a little bit farther east, and section 2 now. We're now east of 33rd Street. You have Mount Marty is here now in this loop here in the RAI building. Some of these areas. This area here, and can someone help me with the zoning? Is that industrial now, or is that commercial?
Industrial.
This is industrial here. Is this also industrial? Okay. It's marked for commercial or industrial development into the future to allow either of those types of zoning designations to take hold there or to develop. Then to the south, you've got identified residential development. That was actually in place in the 2004 plan. carried forward into this plan. Some of you may remember there is a or a preliminary plan that was approved 5 or 6 years ago for some large lot development throughout this area here through the city, even though that property wasn't annexed yet. And then down here is some existing development with what's called Kittleson's Addition that's in the county. That is an area that I know we've discussed just in preliminary discussions about what happens to that eventually. Hopefully that's something that can be absorbed into the city at some point, and I know that there's been discussion sooner than later about that. And those are things that we'll have to have policies in the plan about addressing this area. Beyond that, you see area to remain rural. This is largely floodplain. It's kind of do not touch land unless something drastic happens to it. That's going to be untouched. And then you just see build out of this particular manufactured home park. I've gone really fast so far. Have you seen anything that struck you as wrong so far? Anything you'd like to see widened or anything like that on that first row along 212? We're going to start moving back west, if not. Good news. So, we've gone back now to Section 9 in Pelican Township. We got to figure out. Okay, so Section 9 would be, I'm just going to bring you back to here. Section 9 would be this corner here, is where this is from Section 3. And you can see the intersection, is that 42nd West? I believe that's what that is. That's west. That's a mile west there. Future development in that area, this is a portion that has changed from the 2004 plan because in 2004 there was nothing marked in this area. Since then, this development, this is Lanew's Addition along the North Shore of Lake Pelican, was approved and has developed and honestly is nearly completely built out. Identify it as future residential just so that it continues to develop the way that it is. Don't have any, there is nothing shown to the west of that as future development. There possibly could, but again, those are the types of things we'd rather have. I think the city would probably rather have utilities run out to it if that was the case, and utilities are not there yet.
How far out do the utilities go? As far as the shore of Pelican? Are we in this Lanew's Addition, or are we anywhere close to?
We have gas,
We have gas out there.
but it's Kyneton Clark Electric.
When you went back there, go back a couple slides.
Okay. Do you want?
Yeah, right there, that one.
Okay.
You said there was a large lot addition plan there and there's utilities there? Is that what you said?
There are not utilities in there. There are utilities in 33rd though. It was a preliminary plan is all that's in there. There's nothing, there are no utilities into there. The other thing you'll see here is that it did identify game and fish land as well, that you can see that the very north shore of the lake there is owned by Game Fish and Parks. And for that reason, I just kind of wanted to show that it's unlikely that any development, anything would happen on that particular property at any point, aside from a public use. We move farther west into Section 8. This is the large lot development that I was referencing that's been approved in the county. Currently, this is for reference. This is it's 1.75 miles to 2 miles from city limits. It's over 2 miles from what's developed within the city right now. Just kind of give you an idea of this particular property is. So that's how far away we are from development. There's not, to be honest, there's not a whole lot of there's no expectation for municipal or high density development in this area. So we're not showing to encourage it. That doesn't mean that if someone comes in with a plan that meets expectations of the city, doesn't mean we can't amend the future land use map, and the same thing as far as the county goes too, to be able to do that. But that's just, as of now, we're showing it as to remain rural at this point.
And there's no utilities ran out to that?
Is gas out there? No
No
utilities.
plans to?
It's going to be served by rural utilities, the development that's out there now. I do remember there was some discussion about it, but I know in the end they wound up going with the rural water and rural electric.
Look at some of these, you know, not that so much this one, but the news edition and stuff like that. I mean, if we continue going out that direction, at what point do we, you know, start looking at getting them on the city utilities?
I think that's I think that's an important thing that we probably need to specify some trigger mechanisms, particularly. We do have policies in the city that say that if you're within 200 feet, you hook up to sewer, and perhaps we have similar policies as far as the utilities go as well, and involve some of those types of deals. Those are the types of things that we can have as a policy, and they're a far better policy in a document like this than they may be in some cases to be an actual ordinance. Other cases, they may do that.
At what point, I mean, we're pretty developed out to the news edition. At what point did the utility just stop? I mean, on here, I mean, where did they stop and why did they stop instead of continuing on to, was there a jump where we missed them and then they redeveloped in between them? Or, I mean, we're pretty densely, I mean, pretty much developed up to that area. Why did the utilities stop, or is there a spot where they?
I'll start and then I'll ask you, Mark, to finish. Utilities are to here. They were to here historically, and then Lanús Edition developed at the time that utilities were at about this point. So Lanús Edition developed down here. This is the extent to where utilities were, at least water and electrical, if I'm not mistaken. Then Cax Edition came in, and now as far as that goes, as I understand, I think that this is the only portion that's developed at this point. So we still don't even have that connection or that line all the way out there. Am I hitting that about right on the timing? Yep. So I mean, that's why it wouldn't be yet. And then as I think is being mentioned there too, is that as then you work your way toward those areas, and that is an issue of developing ahead of when you can get municipal utilities out to those locations, is that you do have those conflicts about service territories, customers already on that, and at what point, how do you take those over?
I mean, the way that, are there anything in the county that's recommended to do for them to, if they eventually hook up? I mean, or is it all reconfigured? I mean, I look at the way Compesco was developed, and you know, they came in and put city sewer and water, and we absorbed them, and I'm not sure quite how that worked, but I'm guessing if we had something in place maybe ahead of time as far as directions of septics and.
We do in the county, and I'll go to the two developments, those Lanús Edition aside. I'd have to look at that again to remember how that was set up. There was a lot of discussion about the septic tank issue out there. That's got a different zoning in the county, so that's part of why it kind of had an implied right to be able to develop it the way that it did. With the two residential developments, the Northwoods, which is north of town, this one that I was just on, southwest of town or west of town near Pelican, both of those are set up that they are to have sewers running toward the street in a fashion that they would be able to remove the septic tank and work into a sewer system. So that's the policy that the county's had, and that's through the kind of the gentleman's agreement that the two bodies have had since that went on. The Lanús Edition was a little bit different because it had kind of an implied development right at the time it went. Let me write a couple things down here quick.
What time's Pawn Star start?
You know me, I'll go until you.
I'm just checking your alarm.
That's what I thought. The next couple of sections, I think we can go relatively quickly. We're on the west side of Lake Pelican. That's a long ways away. I don't expect to see that in my lifetime develop. Definitely not residential or not municipally. Just a couple of notes here. This is probably more for interest, but again, that planning area goes all the way half a mile west of Lake Pelican. The reason that you see as you'll go through here, you'll see that this planning area won't typically stop on a road. The idea is that on this side of the road, it's this way, and on this side of the road, it's the other way. It doesn't make that much sense. So if you're gonna look at one side, you look at the other side, at least in 80 deep, 660 feet deep. So again, you can kind of see how that's developed. You obviously expect it to remain rural as it sits. You've got the park here on the south side of Pelican, game and fish land, some houses down there. Again, remain rural as it sits in section 17. Now we're starting to move our way back towards city limits. This comes back to some more of the questions that Mike was bringing up about some of the existing development that's out there, although this is on the western end of that. You can see I've got identified the public land that's owned by Game and Fish along Pelican, but you've also got some existing rural residential development that's already developed out there. That at this point is served by, that's entirely by, is there city gas out there? To Airhaven?
Airhaven, there is we have the electric on East Airhaven,
Okay.
and we have gas on all of it.
So city municipal gas is throughout Airhaven, including this west portion. That's all you're looking at now. However, electric only goes to the east of this location, so it wouldn't serve this particular area that we've got right now. But again, it's not anticipated to develop any farther. Regulations that are in place would keep it where it sits now, barring a substantial development. And by development, I mean going through a planned development process. Moving straight east first and looking, you've got a blank section that's straight east of where we were looking before. You can see here's 15. Moving straight east, we're south of 174th Street, I think that is. Again, nothing going on there. That's all owned as egg parcels right now anyway. As I go back to the north, though, here's Airhaven, where that is. That's nearly completely built out. There are a couple of lots that are held. Most of the ones that are owned in this area that don't have houses on them, I believe, are owned by people who own property on both sides of it. So they're basically being passed down at this point. It's largely built out. Again, though, that's something that, as Mr. Lawrence had pointed out, at some point we've got to talk about how we handle annexing those. However, we're not there yet. We're not, city limits isn't anywhere near that, isn't there yet. It's half a mile away at this point.
And we can't annex it unless it's touching, correct?
Correct, and it's got to be touching. We can't run a right of way or even kitty corner technically.
We used to be able to flagpole annex, but it's against the law now.
So we service this with fire and probably police. Well,
Mhm.
not police maybe, but fire and electrical and gas, but it's not in the city limits, so that we do not get the taxes off of it.
Yeah.
From a property tax standpoint, the city doesn't collect, they don't participate in the property tax side of it. It's more sales tax that the city is funded with than property tax. But yeah, the other problem you have out here is if you annex them in, you got to give them sewer. And a lot of that area, elevation are issues, lift stations are issues, and distance. That sewer's probably the most limiting thing that
Exactly.
keeps us from annexing some stuff in, because you start putting lift stations in for a half a dozen houses and it gets real expensive real fast.
And I want to point out too, is because we'll run into this as we go into this in the future as well, is that you made that point about sewer being expensive, and right now, this particular development, Kittleson's addition, which is on the north side of Pelican as well. Both of those developments existed before the county had zoning and when zoning in the city was in its infancy even. So, I mean, it's got its development right. There's really, the motivation is purely from the standpoint of we want to better our situation for the people living out there, and that's basically it. There's not a lot of obligation, as far as I know, that would force that. I think from that point, I could keep going, but in all reality, my thought is let's swing east at our next meeting.
All right, that sounds good, because the east side of there, now we're gonna get into the fertilizer plants and some of that area.
Exactly. We're going to
I'd
start
like to,
going
yeah,
more commercial,
yeah.
industrial now.
All right, thank you, Luke. Any new business, Jeff? Nope. No executive session, need a motion and a second to adjourn?
So motion.
Motion by Mr. Lawrence, second by Mr. Dolly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.